Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Chat and Learn here with PowerToFly. My name is Mariella, and I am excited to jump into this next hour with you all. I see that a lot of folks are joining us, and I really appreciate you all. Thanks for turning your cameras on, those of you who are. If you are on the fence about whether you should turn your cameras on or off, I was just chatting with our guest speaker, and we were just like, it's so nice to see people, especially with all the crazy things going on in the world. If you haven't showered, nobody's judging you. Put your virtual backgrounds on if you got your dogs or kids running in the background. We would love to hear from you. We would love to see you as well, but also no pressure. We understand. I'm going to jump right into some housekeeping rules so that we can flow through this next hour and everyone can feel comfortable and confident. So again, please turn your cameras on if you feel inclined to do so. And I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noises, but I cannot stress enough that we would love to hear from you. We'd love to have this be, a two-way, three-way, 37 plus more people way conversation. So feel free to come off of mute whenever you want to share your voice. If your question comes up on the screen and you had a dream last night and you want to add to it, if it's not your question and you've got something you want to add, please feel free to come off mute. I'm going to sound like a broken record by the end of this chat. If you want to keep anything anonymous, if you have any sensitive information to share, please feel free to find me in the chat box under Mariella. You can write to me privately and I will flag that to our guest speaker. And then the last thing I'll say is that this is being recorded, so I know we live in a world where everyone is multitasking, and it's okay if you're feeding your kid or you're walking your dog, or maybe if you're on the treadmill right now, but please be present with us so that we can make this an engaging conversation. This is not meant to be something you press play on YouTube and watch. We would really love for you to respond with us, reflect with us, contemplate, add your own tips and tricks. And with that said, you can rewatch this live recording on PowerToFly a little later, and then you can take notes there. Well, I've said enough. I want to jump right in and pass the mic to our guest speaker, Liang, who's calling from Brooklyn right now. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to know about PowerToFly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here. I actually learned about PowerToFly through Amy, who, Amy, I think you dialed in. Amy works for PowerToFly, and she and I got matched through Lunch Club. And then she told me about PowerToFly. I ended up connecting with Nicole, and then here I am today. So I'm so excited to be part of this community. And as Mariella was stressing, please feel comfortable to turn on your cameras. I feel as though this has been a really wonderful community. It's like a no judgment zone. Everyone should feel comfortable being who they are, showing up as, however you want to show up. That's the way for us to just like get the most out of this and really be present. So as Mariella stated, I am going to be your guest today. My name is Liang Chung, and the first thing here is that I grew up with limited resources. And because I grew up with limited resources, I think that it really taught me a lot about being able to be creative about what I do have, and really making the most out of all the different opportunities and experiences that came my way. I do not like to follow a rule book. So one of the things that was really radical or a big decision that I made was I quit my corporate job back in November to start my own business. And I actually launched my business in the middle of COVID. So my company, which is called Stack, went live at the end of May, and I've been learning a ton, and it's been a really amazing experience. So I highly recommend it for anyone who's thinking about potentially taking that big leap to explore something that they're really passionate about, and and put a product or a service out there for people to consume. So here I am today. I'm now the founder and CEO of Stack. And the way that I describe Stack is that we provide learning content in the form of online classes, toolkits, and coaching in order to upskill and transform the next generation of HR leaders. I am a former HR leader and practitioner. So I spent over 15 years in that life. And now I'm packaging that information, that experience, and I'm teaching others on how to transform themselves into that next generation. And then additionally, I recently got invited to join as a board member for the Global Connections for Women, which is this worldwide organization that has over 3.5 million members of girls and women. And we provide different types of programs and mentorship in order to, really give advancement opportunities to women and girls all around the world. There are boot camps for new entrepreneurs that teaches them on how to fine tune their pitch and get funding for their businesses, among a number of other programs. So I'm really proud to be able to be part of that organization.
Wow, lovely. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I love that you love transformation. It's one of the hot topics in my journal and in my everyday life. I'm thinking constantly of how can I reinvent myself while staying true to myself? And of course, that requires you changing in your career, because you can't talk about the professional without talking about the personal. I love that quote. And so congratulations to you for all of the beautiful things you've accomplished, and especially during these times. I see that Nicole dropped in the chat box a link to her company's website, so be sure to check that out. And at the end of the chat, Liang, I would love for you to remind us how we can get in touch with you and support the beautiful work that you're doing. Before we dive into this beautiful introduction that you've got set up for us today, I just want to shout out where everyone here is calling from that's joining us live right now. So I'm in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Our guest speaker is calling from Brooklyn right now, and we've got folks calling from San Diego, Cambridge, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Tampa, Florida, Portland, Oregon, Virginia, Richmond, California, San Diego, Chicago, just outside of Chicago, New Jersey, California, Dublin, California, Hawaii, Texas, Georgia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Let's see, I see Long Island, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Chile. Awesome, great. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Philly, LA, awesome. So we are representing pretty globally here, and I want to say thank you everyone for joining. I know that we've got a lot of crazy things going on in the world, and so I really value your time and your presence for this next hour. With that said, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I want to hear from you all throughout this whole hour, so feel free to drop in the chat box, come off of mute. We want this to be casual and really engaging and profound for you. At the end of the day, let's put these things into practice so that we can evolve tomorrow, right? So Liang, take us away. I'm going to pass the mic to you and just walk us through this beautiful introduction before we jump into their questions.
Yeah. So the topic that we're talking about here is on building your skills inventory, and what exactly is a skills inventory, and how do I create one, and what kind of skills do I need to have, and what's important in order to refine those skills. I want to start this chat with a personal story about my first job, and I may be dating myself. Some of you may not even know these images that are sitting in front of you. So on the left-hand side of the screen is a electronic typewriter, which looks very similar to the first typewriter that I had. And then on the left side of the screen is a picture of carbon paper. I'm sure some of you haven't even seen this before. So my very first job was typing invoices for my dad, who had a printing business. And that job happened when I was probably 12 or 13. So DocuSign didn't exist back then. So he would handwrite different types of receipts, right, from clients that he was doing business with. And then he would come home and give me these handwritten receipts. And then I would type an invoice on these carbon paper with my electronic typewriter. So I call it my first job very loosely and in quotations, because I wasn't exactly on payroll. This is like a typical family business where he would just give me cash for services rendered, right? And I was totally happy with that. So every time I typed up invoices, he would give me $20 for my work. So one day my dad comes home, and he obviously was really busy that day because he handed me a pretty big stack of handwritten receipts. And I was super stoked to get it because I just saw cash sitting in front of me. So I, head over to my electronic typewriter and I start typing away. And then once I was done, I happily went to my dad and I waited for my pay. And so he reaches into his wallet and he pulls out a $20 bill. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I just put in double the amount of my usual work and he's giving me $20. And so I proceed to negotiate this with him, because I couldn't believe that, I did double the amount of work and he was still paying me the same rate. So my dad, with a really straight face, looks at me and he just says, "I let you live in this house." And that was the end of that conversation. So, just to give you some background on who my dad is, I mean, he had his own business. He worked 14-hour days. He was not having his 13-year-old tell him that he wasn't paying them enough. And so he just like laid it on to me straight and just, flat out told me like I was allowed to live in his house and I was not to negotiate my pay with him. And that was the end of the story. So, needless to say, this experience most definitely was an epic fail for me. However, when I look back at this experience, and we can proceed to the next slide, one of the things that I, learned from this experience is that I demonstrated a lot of skills in that one interaction. So the first skill that I was able to demonstrate is analysis, because I was able to identify that, previously I was working on, I was working a certain amount of hours or maybe put in a certain amount of time and I was getting a set pay. And now that has changed. And therefore, that allowed me to really build my case and set my position as to why I felt strongly that I deserved a larger paycheck, right? And then even though I didn't get very far, I did start the initial conversation to have a negotiation with my dad. Unfortunately, like that's just kind of like the downside of working for your father and being 13 is that he like squashed that really quick. So I think, one of the things that's important and really what inspired this conversation is that, our narrative about building skills changes as we become adults, because all of a sudden the focus becomes on all the skills that we don't have and how we can acquire certain skills. But what we don't realize is that throughout our entire lives, we have been spending every single second and minute of our lives collecting various skills. And those skills are extremely valuable. And it's just a matter of really looking at it from a different frame of mind and figuring out how you can tell a story about those skills. So now let's turn the conversation away from me and over to you. And we can proceed to the next slide about you building your own skills inventory, and specifically focus on how you build your skills inventory to complete a job search, to do a career pivot, or to pursue that next promotion. So when we talk about building skills, the first thing that we really need to understand is when we're approaching a job search or we're looking to make a career pivot or we're pursuing a promotion is what are those skills that we need in order to prepare and qualify for that next job? How do we best position ourselves to make sure that we are the most qualified candidate or we're enabling ourselves to really make that career pivot? So if we jump to the next slide, one of the things that we need to think about in order to identify the right information is to figure out where do we get our data from? And more specifically, what are our data sources? So for me, the top 3 data sources that I tend to rely on the most are existing job descriptions that are out there, interviewing and having conversations with people who are in those roles that I'm targeting. And then the third one is articles or maybe different types of publications or books that give me or provide me with some insights in terms of the skills that I need in order to be really equipped and ready for that next step. So once you've collected all this information, and then if we go to the next slide, you'll see that I pulled an example of a job description. So this is for a marketing role that exists out there. I just went to LinkedIn to pull this. And what I did was in yellow, highlighted all of the different skills that this job description is calling out. So you'll see that team player is highlighted, being able to work independently and collaboratively, being a good storyteller, communication, right? So all of the information that you need in order to build your skills inventory is right here in front of you, right? In the job description. If you were to take the approach of having a conversation with someone in the job, so let's say you're thinking about making a career pivot to be an entrepreneur, then your starting point or your data source would be be having a conversation with another entrepreneur to understand, what kind of skills do you need in order to equip yourself and be prepared to become an entrepreneur. So once you've identified the skills, you can now prepare your own personal skills inventory, right? And the skills inventory is going to comprise of 4 main components that I list in the next slide. And those 4 components include the actual skills. So what's the list of the skills? Having an honest conversation with yourself in terms of what is the proficiency level that you're currently demonstrating those skills. So this could be, and this is an example, it could be none. You could have basic knowledge of it. You can have intermediate or advanced. And then you're also going to identify examples of how you've demonstrated this skill. So let's say that you've identified for one of these skills, you are most certainly advanced in that area. Well, think about how you have in the past or currently are demonstrating advanced knowledge and proficiency in that specific skill. And then if you don't have that skill or you feel as though you need to be more proficient, what's the action or the plan that you're going to take in order to acquire that skill? So once you've compiled all this information, you can put it together in a simple framework or document, which is on the next slide. And this is what your skills inventory would look like. So it's outlining in 4 columns what the skill is, your proficiency level, examples of how you've demonstrated, and then also what's the plan or the action that you're going to take in order to acquire these skills. And so what I love about this is, number one, I love simple things. So if I can put everything together in a simple framework, that works best for me. And it allows you to have access to a tool to be able to outline this. The other great thing I love about this is that when you go into an interview or you are pitching yourself for a promotion at a job, you have to be able to tell a story and illustrate how you are ready, right? Or you have the right qualifications for that. So outlining the examples here, really helps you to frame that story and pull from, these examples that you've demonstrated to help craft and create that story to best position yourself. And so I just think that this is something that could be really useful that you can easily apply to your day-to-day to begin to build that skills inventory.
Beautiful. So we've got some folks writing in the chat box, praising this framework and just, saying that they love this whole introduction that you've written. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. I've already got a couple of questions coming in, which is great. So I'm just going to flag a couple of these before we move on to the ones that were presented offline. Is that okay? Since we got some live questions here. Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
So when I read your question from the chat box, feel free to also come off mute if you would like to add more. So Amanda writes here, a lot of the HRIS tools companies require skills that cost a lot of money, so aren't really accessible for learning on one's own. I've learned what I can for free through videos or product demos, but I haven't actually used them. What can I do to gain skill in those HRIS tools to transition to a career in human resources, people, or operations?
Yeah, so Amanda, this is a really great question and probably, a challenge that a lot of people can often find themselves in, especially when you're making a career pivot. So if you're unable to access any type of real life experience of actually touching that particular system, one way that you can demonstrate your ability to, to be able to adapt is to talk about how quickly you can learn something. And so I always like to hear stories about, this is a time when I needed to be able to quickly adapt and learn something new, and I didn't have any previous experience. And these are the steps that I took to help transition myself really quickly. And that demonstrates to me as a hiring manager that, oh, this person understands where they currently stand, what are some of the gaps, and they actually can create a plan to be able to learn quickly, hit the ground running, and acquire those skills quickly. So that's one approach that you could take. Another approach that you can take is there another system that performs similarly to the system that you don't currently have knowledge of, right? So, working in the HR space, in my opinion, a lot of the HR information systems pretty much do the same thing, right? So I have the mentality of like, if you know one, you kind of know them all. And so it's about telling that story about how your proficiency in one system that behaves and acts very similarly to another system can, adequately prepare you to be able to transition quickly to pick up that new skill.
Yeah, I actually downloaded a demo of Bamboo HR and taught myself how to use that tool because I know it's very similar to some of the others. And that's the only one that really had a free product demo that you could download. But I also watched videos and demonstrations on Lever or Lever. I'm not sure which way you pronounce it, but trying to teach myself how to use those because a lot of companies require Greenhouse or Lever. And some are still using Bamboo HR, but I couldn't get to using actually Greenhouse because it costs so much money to actually use. And if you've ever downloaded Bamboo HR's product demo, you know that you'll get calls and emails for like months after asking
and
the product.
I know. And see what you just did just now, Amanda, like that story is really powerful because you said, look, I don't have the resources to purchase a system and it doesn't really make any sense for me to spend money on it. But this is a creative way for me to get access to be able to play around with this tool, familiarize myself with it. And I didn't have to spend any extra money. So as a potential employer or a hiring manager, I would think that that is an amazing skill that I would love to be able to have on my team.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, it'd just be nice to be able to have that more in my resume and have companies know that I am capable of learning that, that way I can get to the screening stage and actually tell that story.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how Amanda and other folks who are chiming in who were wondering about that same question, how they could show that on their resume or maybe in a cover letter? I know this is one of the questions for later on, but you can dive in deep on her scenario and also just kind of throw out a wide umbrella for how to just leverage those skill sets that maybe people don't see because you're doing them offline and you're doing it to take care of yourself, but how you can implement it, to make the company grow essentially.
Yeah, I think, one way that you can do this is to highlight it either in a cover letter or maybe to indicate that somehow on your resume that you have familiarity with that particular system or product. And you're being very honest, right? It's not that you have working knowledge of it on, within a specific job, but you have actually gained some exposure to it. So it's not something that would be completely foreign.
Beautiful. And Devne here writes, she echoes and says, you can also see if you can do some virtual volunteering for a nonprofit and they may have this system or a similar system and need someone to help out. I've done that. I help someone else and I get to practice. Thank you, Devne, for that. We've got another question here from Alexandra here in the chat box. I have a hard time gauging proficiency level. There are things I've used or done for a long time, but not sure that alone makes me advanced. Is there a good way to better measure that?
Yeah, I think that this is where it's a little bit tricky because it's a self-assessment. So one thing that you could do is to get an objective opinion from someone that you work with. So if this is let's say it's a system that you're using and you've been using it for a really long time, maybe you could talk to somebody at work who has actually gained some exposure to how you're using that particular system to get their opinion. If they were to rate you your proficiency level, right, on a scale from like 1 to 5 or from low, medium, high, how would they evaluate that your proficiency? And then from there, you can then ask a follow-up question on, what could I do to really advance my proficiency, from intermediate to advanced, right, in that particular system. So I think that could be a real non-biased way that you can obtain that information from somebody else.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that response. So with that said, you all have submitted some great questions offline. I mean, some fabulous questions offline. I hope that we can get through all of them. If we don't worry, we'll fill you in at the end of the chat so that you can see how Liang will respond to your questions. And then with that said, feel free to hop in, come off mute or write in the chat box so that we can get to your question as well. With that said, let's move on to this first question that you all have submitted offline. And again, if this is your question that you see, feel free to come off mute. If it's not your question, you want to add something to it, feel free also to share your voice. So what are some examples you've seen that help a candidate positively stand out from the crowd?
Yeah, so one of the debates that's going on right now is the relevance of cover letters, whether or not you should even invest time into writing a cover letter anymore, which is, it's an interesting one. And I myself usually don't invest a ton of time in writing cover letters. And one of the things that I saw recently that I just thought was a brilliant way to be able to brand yourself and then also demonstrate your skills in different areas and also take on a creative approach to present yourself is actually putting together a personal website. So on the personal website, and this is something that's very common for folks that work on a creative side or maybe design, they would usually have a website that shows their portfolio and some of their previous work. But I actually started to see more of this happening in non-creative functions like HR, for example, right? Or finance is another area where you can actually build your own website. And what I love about this is that it's taking a really creative approach to showcasing who you are, what your brand is about, and then also what are some of the things that you can bring onto the table, right? It's also demonstrating that you have the ability to expand beyond what you know traditionally, right? And be able to be creative in a different way. And then I also really enjoy that this is something that's very memorable because it's an approach that not every candidate is going to do, right? Not every single candidate's going to have a website, about who they are. So to me, whenever I get access to this kind of candidate, I just think like, brilliant. I now know who you are, and I remember the page, I remember the video that you had, set up on there, which is, a really great way to just stand out from the crowd.
Beautiful. And I'd love for you to, you're touching a little bit about on media, right? Websites, videos. How can we find, because that might be a lot overwhelming for a lot of people, especially if they're not in the world of PR and marketing per se. So how can one person find confidence to kind of expose themselves essentially using these, forms of media that will enhance they'll help them stand out essentially?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of web companies out there that you don't have to actually have any coding experience in order to put a website together, and they do it in a real simple way that anyone can be able to create their own website. So that's one avenue that you could take. We all have friends that have different jobs, so I'm sure you could tap into a friend that has knowledge that can give you a quick tutorial or maybe even build the website for you for free, maybe for a free dinner or drinks or something like that. The other thing is if we don't have a friend in that space, our friends definitely have friends of their own that we can get introduced to. So I think there's a lot of creative ways that we can explore where we either don't necessarily have to do the work ourselves, or we can get the knowledge or the skills transferred from somebody else in order to educate ourselves and then become more proficient in getting that done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Build your network and use your network as well. I love that. Okay, so let's move on to the next question here. And I love that you all are responding to each other in the chat box. Keep that flowing. I love that. All right, so this question here on the screen. What are the skills that should be on everyone's inventory, regardless of industry and occupation?
Yeah, this is a good one. So as we learned from 2020, this is a very memorable year, is number one, adaptability to change. So we got firsthand experience on the disruption that things are way out of our control that could have an enormous impact on our lives, on our professional careers that we may not necessarily have been given a fair warning about, right? And so how do we adapt to those disruptions? And we're seeing from like both large companies and also small businesses on their ability, right, to adapt to these changes, and some are far better than others. And so that would be number one on my list is just being able to just go with the motions, and then also being prepared for worst case scenario, and then being able to come up with a backup plan or some kind of creative solution, right, to work around that particular area. The second skill I would say is storytelling. So just like what I applied in the beginning of this, I think stories are really quite memorable, and there's like a level of stickiness to it, and it's much more enjoyable. Like imagine if I started off this chat with like some kind of boring presentation of like an Excel document and, with no color, no stories, like no one's going to care. There's nothing memorable about it, but you'll probably remember the story of me trying to negotiate my salary with my dad, right? And getting paid $20. So I think, the more equipped and the more skilled at being able to communicate a really powerful story to emphasize the point that you're driving, or maybe to highlight some things, I think that is going to, last you forever, and you'll be able to become very successful with it. And what I love about storytelling is that it doesn't matter if you're in a technical field or a non-technical field, because storytelling is applicable across the board.
Speaking of, so I love that you are speaking about the power of stories. I'm a little late to the game, but I'm super involved in reading Yuval Noah Harari's books and watching his interviews and like his presentations online. And he's a historian, right? And so one of the things that he points out is how important fiction is in just like how our societies are run and how we have been living as Homo sapiens for generations. And I love that you're essentially putting the power back into our hands by helping us realize the importance of our own story, essentially, to share and to help make things memorable, and also just to, help cultivate the way that we want to work, right? To see this as a partnership and not to see it as, you're selling your soul to someone to pay you, some dollars. Speaking of, being resilient and just open for, change during these crazy times, I'm going to read something here that Ashley has written in the chat box that I'd love to hear you reflect on. So Ashley writes, I'm currently working as an executive assistant, about 5 years experience. I'm the only Black employee at my company, and after the race riots, I felt compelled to create an allyship employee resource group at my current job. Congratulations on that. That's so important. Through that process, I had the chance to dabble in the world of diversity and inclusion, and I fell in love with it. Recently, my manager wanted me to start thinking about my career path, and once I mentioned how passionate I am about D&I, she told me I should, quote, leave the company since this isn't a priority for the organization at this time. After this, I'm a little lost as to how I can pivot into a D&I role when a lot of the job required 10 plus years of experience. Any advice on what I can do? And thanks in advance.
Wow. So on the one hand, I respect your manager by being so candid and honest about the reality so that you're not, essentially wasting your time. But then at the same time, I feel really sad for this company that they don't realize how important this subject is, right? And making it a priority. What I would say, Ashley, is that the world is your oyster right now, because this topic is fire. It's fire. Everybody is looking for somebody. So even though there are companies out there saying that they're looking for someone with 10 years of experience, the reality is that the industry hasn't fully caught up. The demand is so high that even if you were to start off small by, just talking about the experience that you gained and maybe pick up some, pro bono work elsewhere, I think that in and of itself tells a really compelling story about how your passion and also your desire to gain experience in this space will really, and also that you care, right, about this topic so deeply, right, makes you a really strong candidate for this position. So I would not be discouraged by that. I would just keep connecting with different people, and there is just endless of opportunities right now in the DEI space.
Absolutely. And then just to piggyback on what you're saying, historically speaking, this role clearly hasn't existed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this situation. So 10 plus years of experience is such a high ladder to climb. And so please, Ashley, don't feel like, thrown off by that. I love that, Leanne, you said that the world is your oyster. Yes, we need more people who are authentically interested in D&I and not just using it, to seem popular or to just be on a trend. One of the chats that I hosted last month was actually around this exact thing. And I decided to use the title, Black is Trending, Now What? with this, just, this example in mind, you cannot fix racism or any of the isms by pressing a button. It takes hard work. It takes people who want to be innovative, who want to share their stories and listen in a new way. So I see some folks also writing in the chat box to you, Ashley. You have our support, if nothing else. And this is also a great time for me to say, I love putting things into practice when we do these chats. So if you are calling us live now and you want to connect with some of these folks who are here currently listening to this chat, please drop in the chat box your preferred way of getting social. So if it's LinkedIn or your website or whatever, Nicole might I'll actually drop a doc in here. So there, she's going to drop a Google Doc here so that everyone can just write their preferred ways of staying connected, so that we can support people like Ashley and people like Amanda and anyone else who wants to share their voice here. And maybe you could collaborate and start to build your network and support each other, because, I do find, Ling, that we are, especially now, we're at this crossroads where anything goes, essentially. And what side do you want to be on? Do you want to, I spoke in San Francisco last year about the importance of emotional intelligence and inclusive community in the workplace. And one of the things that I said that this guy mentioned to me afterwards that it was a little striking, but I was like, you can either be a dinosaur or you can try to help everyone try to be a little more connected in an authentic way, essentially using your emotional intelligence. And what I meant by being a dinosaur is continue to do things the way that things haven't been working, the way that things have been, pretty exclusive, or, I don't know, continue to help marginalized communities and, all the things that have gotten us into this big catastrophe now. It's like, do you want to continue to be a dinosaur? And actually, do you want to continue to work for dinosaurs, essentially? And I also love that, Liang, that you were saying that you respect that they up front said that. I wish that more people would say that, actually, that we're not interested, so that people would know and not expect them to tackle these really chewy topics like D&I. I know that I said a lot there, but I'll pass the mic back to you to see if you want to reflect on that a little bit.
No, I agree with your points, exactly. And with any kind of change, I think there's power in numbers, and I don't think that this is something that will go away. So Ashley, I think it's awesome that this is something that you realize it is and clear interest that you have, and you want to transition that interest into a career. I think that there's something that is in store for you that's going to be fantastic, and just keep working at it, and you'll be able to get that opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. This is really great. I appreciate that. I was really discouraged, but thank you for this. So.
Was that Ashley?
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Ashley.
Yes, Ashley, thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for hopping off of mute. If you'd like to share anything else, we'd love to hear. I feel like you are not the only one going through this. Actually, I'm certain I see folks nodding their heads as well. What do you find is the most I don't know, what's a good question to ask? Because I want to keep you off your mic, Ashley. Actually, Liang, do you have a question for Ashley?
Well, my question is, when your manager had that candid conversation with you, what was your initial reaction? How did you handle it? Because I'm sure that other people here may find themselves in a similar situation one day, right? So I think, hearing from a peer who has gone through this experience, I think would be really helpful for us to prepare for it.
Totally. I think I was just so taken back. It was honestly the last thing I thought she would say. So with the ERG, I basically created a campaign where we raised almost $2,500 to donate to change organizations. I created a fellowship for our company to start sponsoring Black female coders, pay for their tuition. I did a lot of work, built a mobile app, built resources for everyone. It was really crazy that she could just mitigate my work ethic like that. I think I was just wait, what? And this was all in less than a month that I pulled all of this off. So I think, in my heart of hearts, I honestly think there was some malice in that statement, because there's also someone on our team who has a D&I title, but they haven't done much work in the space. So I think she was just trying to protect them, when I try to conceptualize it, but it was still nevertheless really hurtful. So it's and I get it, we're a smallish company, even if we don't need someone 100% of the time, we have one Black employee, our company is about 83% male. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the diversity front on all fronts. So it's just sorry Sorry, that's my mom.
Oh.
But
Well, what I would,
We're
yeah.
proud of you.
Yes, I second that. I think do not let that experience rain on your parade. I think that's a huge accomplishment. Everything that you were able to, to do and gain from that very short time that you had that experience. And then now you could take that elsewhere and have another company benefit from it and would actually appreciate it.
yeah, thank you for that. I hope so. But thank you, everyone. This was really great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. And honestly, I mean, I feel like we need to have a separate chat and learn to talk specifically about this, because it's like, is it right or is it wrong? Of course, it's, in our opinion, it's probably wrong, but also in the sense that they're giving space for other people to snatch you up, Ashley, essentially, and give you more of, space and a bigger platform to continue to build on all those beautiful things that you have been able to create based on, what's going on historically and currently right now. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I've got the chat box blowing up right now, so I'm gonna actually flag a private question here that I have. So let's see, let me go here. Okay, perfect. So I'm interested in switching careers, but I'm struggling because so many candidates are in the market who have experience, and companies have said they're going with those candidates. So I totally understand Liang's points for normal, but any advice that you would add for COVID in this very weird labor market?
Yes. So this is, I probably sound like a broken record in terms of like everything that you hear outside of, in the rest of the world, which is there is so much power in networking. And I too struggle with networking, and now I have to be full on networking because that's the only way for my business to survive. But it is the best way for you to get your foot in the door is connecting with the right people, because those people will connect you with the right opportunity that isn't even public, right? In some cases, or they're just thinking about it and they're waiting for the right person to show up. And so that's your way of being competitive with people who already have that traditional experience. And so my advice there is to try and, connect with as many people as possible through LinkedIn. You can, I love it when people reach out and just say, hey, I love your background. There's something interesting there. Would you mind taking 20 minutes to have a conversation with me? Would you mind, taking 30 minutes to have a conversation with me? And the beauty of the situation that we're in regarding COVID is that I think, people are more available today than they have been in the past because we're all stuck at home. And so there isn't this need to spend time commuting, fighting traffic, getting home to relieve, your babysitter, right? So there's definitely more accessibility, I find, with people, and people are also much more understanding. And that's a huge compliment when someone's reaching out to you and saying, hey, I think your background is really interesting and I'd love to learn from you. And it's not threatening. It's not like you're begging them for a job. You're just asking them for a conversation. And, from there, the next thing that I would do once you're able to have that initial conversation with that person is let them know, look, I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned A, B, and C from you. Do you know anyone else that would like to have a similar conversation with me that I can learn from? And then already from that one contact, maybe you get introduced to 2 people or 3 people that you didn't know, right? And so that's how you build up your network. So, that's the best way to beat your competition is through networking.
I love that. It comes back to networking often, especially during these times. And it's like, if you were on the fence about it, we've kind of been pushed into the waters at this point. So you got to find the way that works for you, right? Essentially. Mm-hmm. Since so many things are on pause or just working in a different way. So, and I always find that it's empowering when you are vibing with it, when you don't feel like you have to do it because and you have this kind of phoniness about that everyone is afraid of putting themselves out there. But if you do it in an authentic way, it's okay. And at the end of the day, if you are empowering yourself, there's nothing that you've lost by sharing a little bit of that online. So, and then with all the craziness that's online, I feel like we need more balance. So share your beautiful stories, people. Okay, so let's move on to this next question. And I'm just going to flag that we've got about 15 minutes left. So if you have not had a chance to jump off with me, I know this time it goes by quickly. I told you. We're going to read this question here that's on the screen. I'm going to pause and let someone come off of mute, or a couple folks come off of mute, just so that we have time to get to their questions as well. So with this question here on the screen, how do you begin to project manage your own skill set? I love this question.
Yeah, so I'll go back to that skills inventory. That's a great way for you to be able to outline and get a real, honest look at where your skills stand in terms of proficiency level, and then also what kind of skills that you have, and then also the plan that you're going to take in order to acquire that skill.
Beautiful. All right. So if anyone wants to hop off of mute, now's your time to shine. I'm going to take a sip of water. Usually that gives a nice pause for people to come off of mute. Let's see if it works this time.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So I would just love your professional opinion. I've been working with a company that, interviewing with them since June. And they keep saying like, oh, we're trying to get the extra headcount. Like, we'll let you know soon. We'll let you know soon. And I'm not hearing back from them. It's now been a month. I've sent 2 different emails following up and reached out to a different recruiter as well. And the second recruiter said, oh, thank you for your patience. But the recruiter I've been working with since June hasn't responded. Do I reach out to the hiring manager directly to find out what's going on and like pivot around the recruiter at this point because he hasn't responded in a month? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you already connected with the hiring manager and have already established that connection and relationship, then feel free to reach out. I'm all for it. Don't ask for permission, just go for it. Just reach out and get that information that you're looking for. I would say, working on the corporate side, depending on how large this company is, and then also, what their revenue goals are, and whatever challenges that they may be going through, it's very common to wait for an approval, and sometimes it takes months to be able to get that. So my guess is that in this current economic state, they may not necessarily be giving you the runaround. It could be a very honest answer. And so in order to just kind of like regain that power to yourself, instead of just kind of like sitting there waiting for the answers to be provided to you, definitely reach out to hiring manager and just let them know, look, I'm still very interested in this opportunity. I had a great conversation with you. I feel very strongly that I would be able to contribute and add value to this company. However, the process has stalled, and I just want to get a better idea of, what's contributing to that delay. And then also, what should I anticipate in terms of when a decision can be made? And so you're putting that, ownership back on them, and putting that responsibility back on them to be honest with you as a candidate, right? On what the expectations are, so that you can also, begin to plan appropriately for yourself.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you all. So before the next person comes off of mute, I'm just going to reshare what Nicole dropped in the chat box. We've got a couple of events coming up that we want to share with you all. For example, I believe it's on Thursday. We've got a chance for you all to practice some interview questions. And you don't need to come with any prepared questions unless you want to, but it's going to be kind of like mock interviews that we're hosting for you all, just to start to loosen up and be more confident and be, on the other side, so that you can be preparing for any interviews that you have coming up. So then with that said, I'll also drop here I think it's here. Yes, perfect. So if you want to add your LinkedIns to this doc here so that you can stay connected, that would be great as well. And then we've got about 10 more minutes. So I just want to open this back up to anyone who'd like to take themselves off of mute here. Liang, I really appreciate you for diving into these questions as well. And I appreciate everyone. Yeah, and I appreciate everyone who's been writing in the chat box and coming off of mute. So if we don't have anyone else that wants to come off mute, I've got a question here that I'm going to read. Okay, so Stephanie writes, job searching tips during pandemic, aside from brushing up transferable skills on my resume, including volunteer work and taking free online courses. Let's see. Is it okay to apply again for regular jobs, or it's more practical to look for remote, like accounting? Safer since the pandemic is not over yet, and too convenient. Actually, Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to come off mute because it looks like you've got some really chewy, awesome questions here, and I want to make sure that Leanne gets it right. So can you hop off of mute if you don't mind? Sorry to put you on the spot. All right. Okay, so I'll continue to read it here and just let me know. I'll start from the beginning, Liang. Okay, so job searching tips during pandemic, aside from brushing up transferable skills on my resume, including volunteer work and taking free online courses like LinkedIn, edX, Udemy. Is it okay to apply again for regular jobs, or is it more practical to look for remote work? And then she lists 1, safer since the pandemic is not over yet, and 2, convenient since remote work is the new normal, to focus on applying for both remote and in-person jobs, or to start a business on the side. Thank you for sharing your expertise. All right, go for it.
I'd say yes to all of the above. It's there's definitely power in numbers, but in all honesty, I think there's a lot there, right? So there's one question about looking for a regular job that once this pandemic's over, you would physically report into work, and so that would have to be some kind of local position. You also asked about remote work, right? Because this could potentially be the new normal that we're experiencing, and most companies are going to go remote. And the third option is to start your own business, right? So those are 3 very, very different paths to take. And I think the first step is to have an honest conversation with yourself, right? To self-reflect and figure out how does this all tie to your long-term career ambitions, right? I think sometimes we get lost in the immediate of like, I need a job, I need money, and I need this right now. And so you're just kind of like, reacting to those emotions and those feelings and just kind of like doing everything. But, that easily crashes and burns very quickly, right? If it doesn't line up with your long-term goals and it doesn't work with your lifestyle in some way. And so if it's important for you to be able to have some kind of steady paycheck and have that security of having a job, then you can take out the entrepreneurial, option off of the table, because that's pretty high risk, right? At many levels. So then you're down with 2. And, from there, you can make a decision as to whether or not, it's important for you to report into work locally and pursue that option, or to apply for jobs that are going to be permanently remote, which gives you, a different level of flexibility. I don't think that there's any harm in pursuing both and then finding yourself in a really good problem to have, which is to have multiple offers and multiple options to choose from. So that would be my advice, is that if you're in your heart, you really want to pursue starting your own business, then this could be a really good time. I learned by attending this another chat, that I think the number was like 60% of good businesses or great businesses were actually started during a recession or at the tail end of recession. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to pursue starting your own business. However, if that's something that you don't want to do, then pursue the other 2 options. And there's plenty of positions that are being posted now where companies are being very honest that they're open to remote workers, right? And so it opens it up to anybody to apply to those roles.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for submitting that question. I'm going to ask anyone else, if anyone else wants to come off of mute. We've got about 7 minutes left, so I do want to hear from you if you've got something else. So take a light pause and let any courageous listeners come off of mute so that Leanne can.
I have a question. I've only worked for very small businesses, fewer than 5 people, actually, except for like some restaurant jobs I had as a teenager. But I'm looking to get into working with a much larger company now. So when I'm in job interviews and I'm asked about working with coworkers or, having anybody working below me, I don't have that same level of experience. How can I prove that I can work for a larger company, even though I'm coming from such small businesses?
That's a really good question. I think maybe one option that you could pursue is, if you have the ability to do this, is potentially take some kind of like volunteer work or get involved with an organization that is large in size. And so that way you can gain that large company experience because you're working on projects that involve multiple parties, right? You're collaborating with different people, and you're also able to maybe solve problems that are more unique to a larger organization. So that's one outlet that you can explore. Another way that you can demonstrate that is, to understand a little bit more about what specifically about the large company experience is important for them to gain, right? As an applicant, right? So then it forces the question on, okay, I get it. You want someone who has big company experience, but what about that big company experience is particularly important to you? So you're forcing them to actually explain to you whether it's collaboration skills, it's being able to handle politics. Is it about being able to juggle multiple responsibilities, right? What is it? Because once you're able to identify what those specific skills are, then you can actually relate it back to how you already have that knowledge, right? Through your own personal experience with working at a smaller company.
Great. Yeah, I'll definitely include that as a question during interviews, should that come up.
You're welcome. Yeah, I just feel like that's just kind of like a cop-out answer to me, like big company experience. And you get that on the reverse. It's like, I want startup experience. Well, what is it specifically about the startup experience that's really important to you? Is it about, not being able to work with, a lot of resources? Well, I could tell you a whole boatload of things challenges that I've encountered, where I didn't have a lot of resources, and this is how I handled it. So it's a really good way to be able to, to force them to be more specific about it, and then put you in a position to be able to to present yourself in the best way on how you have been able to demonstrate that knowledge and that skill in a non-traditional way.
Yeah, I've definitely done volunteer work. I've sat on boards of things, so I've got that.
There you go.
Beautiful. And then we've got some folks chiming in as well, Amanda. So Beth writes, one way to frame your overall experience, if you've worked for a small business, and then you've probably worked in a fast-paced environment and had to wear many hats. Being able to specialize in a larger company should be an easier transition than someone transitioning from a larger company to a smaller one. And then you had a couple people here echo what Beth was saying. So I just wanted to share that. A lot of folks here that are listening live support that as well. Great. So we've got just about 3 more minutes. I'm going to ask if anyone wants to come off of mute, and if not, we'll wrap this up. I see a lot of folks that are already praising you, Liang, for sharing all of your beautiful knowledge. So if anyone wants to hop off of mute, now's your time to shine. Go for it. All right. If not, then I'm just going to read this next one here, and then I'm going to pass the mic back to you, Liang, so that you can let us know how we can find you when this chat and learn ends here. So how do you decide on what skills you want to learn next? Do you have any suggestions for free courses to supplement your skills inventory?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to figure out first, what are you working towards, right? Are you working towards a specific role, right? Are you working towards changing your entire career into another area? So before you start to sign up for any classes, before you pay money to go back to school, I think first have an honest conversation with yourself and figure out where are you heading and what are your career ambitions and what are you working towards. And then that will help guide you and help you determine what are those skills, right, that you should be investing your time into. In terms of like free courses to supplement your skills inventory, all of these different online, e-learning providers, right, have tons of resources that are available, such as like Coursera, Udemy, and then let's also acknowledge the fact that COVID canceled so many different events, like live events, and made them all free to different people. And I most certainly am taking advantage of it. I have tried to attend as many things as I possibly can giving me access to people that I normally would not have access to, and then knowledge that I normally would have to pay for. So I think that it would be, really silly to not take advantage of this unique opportunity by just kind of signing up for everything, because there's so much available and there's so much that's accessible, that it's not as challenging as it used to be able to access free stuff.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful note to leave on, just for looking towards the future and how to, build our skill set inventory. Liang, take us out with some food for thought and let us know how we can connect with you.
So in terms of like my final message is, don't limit yourself by not pursuing something because you don't feel like you are good enough or have enough. I think, this is something that, a lot of women sometimes fall into the trap of like imposter syndrome. We know that most women don't apply for a job because they don't meet every single qualification on a job description. Apply anyway, put yourself out there because you never know unless you try. So that's one message that I want to leave you with. In order for us to stay connected, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just write a little note and tell me that that we met through PowerToFly, so that I know who you are and how we got connected. And then check out my website. I also offer coaching as well. So if that's something that you're interested in, please connect with me and I'm happy to have a conversation about that. The website is palorastack.com. And then you can also follow Pelora Stack on LinkedIn and then also on Instagram. So that's a way to stay in touch. But I really enjoyed this conversation. It was so much fun. I love how engaged everybody was. And thank you so much for the compliments and all the feedback in the chat. It's been really great use of this past hour.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone. I'm going to connect with you for sure offline because I know you have so much information, so much more information to share, and I want to stay connected. So thank you everyone for joining us for this past